In this video, I'm sharing the 10 books that most changed my life and I think everyone needs to read. These are the books that made an impact on me in terms of hacking my mindset, cultivating self-love, and helping me step into the most confident, authentic version of myself. These are also the books that I always come back to, whether it's sharing them with a friend or with a client, or even just seeing them on my shelf and wanting to reread them again. So I'm very excited to share them with you today. If you're new here, my name is Daphne. I started out as a model, I still am, but over time I also became a coach and started sharing content around my experiences in my career and also my journey throughout my 20s. If that's something you're into, you should definitely subscribe and stick around for more. I think we have a good variety. I have a couple books that are more practical in terms of mindset and habits and like the nitty-gritty personal growth, but I also have some books that are a little bit more on the spiritual side, manifesting, quantum leaping, and then some books on finance and relationships. So I'm gonna start with the first one, and this is the book that actually got me into self-help and personal development books, and this book is The Defining Decade by Meg Jay. Why Your 20s Matter and How to Make the Most of Them Now. I would say that this book is really meant to be a wake-up call for anyone in their 20s to be intentional about their career, their relationships, and their personal growth. Sometimes in life we hear this saying that 30 is the new 20. This author actually explains why that's not the case and why that ends up really hurting you later on in life. Throughout the book, the author actually uses real life examples of clients that she worked with, obviously anonymously, of clients who were in their 30s and 40s who wish that they had taken their 20s more seriously and really made the most out of them rather than being less proactive about them. It's funny because I'm just now noticing that it actually says why 30 is not the new 20. But overall, the book just kind of encourages you to use your 20s to lay the foundation for the rest of your life instead of just letting life happen to you and drifting aimlessly without a goal or a vision. Overall, it's a really good motivational read, especially if you're younger. Like, I would recommend this to someone who's in their early to mid 20s. Although I did read this book again probably sometime last year. I was reading it for a TikTok. This book is really easy to read. It's a mix of actual science, but also combined with real life stories, which I think makes it a little bit easier to read and also just more relatable. I highly recommend, especially if you're someone who's in their early 20s and doesn't quite know where they're going or what they're doing. I think that this book can really help you out. Okay, the second book is The Mountain Is You by Brianna Wiest. I'll put a picture up on the screen because I don't actually have the physical copy of the book, and I'll tell you about that in a second. This book is all about self-sabotage and how common it is in our everyday life. This book is just so amazing. Like, she really dives deep on self-sabotage. Like, I've never read a book like this before, and I didn't even understand how common it is and how basically everyone does this to themselves. She basically explains how self-sabotage is a coping mechanism. She explains that it's a way for us to give ourselves what we need without actually addressing what that deeper need is, if that makes sense. Outside of that, there are so many amazing nuggets of information in there. She also talks a lot about identity, which I've spoken about in my spring reset video and also in my most recent vlog. This is something that I'm really diving deep into. Ultimately, who we believe we are and what we believe we're capable of dictates our life experience, which I fully believe. Even if I didn't believe it before the book, I absolutely believe it now. Yeah, I could go on and on about this book, but without giving too much away, I think that this is the kick in the butt that we all need sometimes. And I will say, I think the tone of this book might be confrontational to some people, but I personally think that I'd rather have that than someone sugarcoating, because I think sometimes we need that push and we need a little bit of a reality check to actually change things and actually get the ball rolling. And speaking about the tone of the book, the reason why I don't have the physical copy is because I listened to this as an audiobook. And normally I am a physical book girl through and through. But with this book, there's just something about having the person speaking to you out loud or in your ear that just makes it hit in a different way and just makes you understand it in a way that I might not have reading the actual physical book. I mean, realistically, I'm probably gonna own it someday anyway because I want it in my library, but for now, I'm gonna revisit it as an audiobook, and I highly recommend you do that too. Okay, then I have this one by Louise Hay. It's called You Can Heal Your Life. And this book is just incredible. I know I spoke about it a little bit recently in one of my vlogs, but I had to include it in this video because it just made such an impact on me. This book is all about how you can transform your life through finding real self-love and self-esteem. I'm like, where do I even start? I would say that this book is split into two parts. The first part, kind of similarly to the last book that I just spoke about, is all about the power of your thoughts and how the way we talk to ourselves and think about ourselves can transform our lives. The author talks about how when we start to really love ourselves, our reality starts to change, and this is because our thoughts ultimately create our reality. And there's so much more that she talks about in this book. She has a great chapter about criticism, and I mentioned this in one of my recent vlogs, how much that impacted me personally because of my own self-talk, and I'm sure that there's people watching this who also have similar self-talk, and how that is just so not helpful and ultimately is going to create a reality that we really don't want. Ultimately, she talks about how self-love and forgiveness are the key to healing. Now, earlier I was mentioning that I feel like this book is split into two parts. The second part of this book is more about the connection between our thoughts and emotions and our physical health. And I'm always wary about talking about this kind of stuff because I know that it can be a sensitive subject for a lot of people. But personally, on a lot of levels, I think that this is very true. Basically, in the second half of the book, she talks about that, and actually at the end, there's a list of holistic healing recommendations. There's a list of all kinds of physical ailments and the mental and emotional causes in the back of the book too. It's just super interesting. Keep an open mind. I always think with these kind of books, it's all about taking what you need and leaving what you don't, and focusing on the message that's important to you at that time. Anyway, this is a really easy read. Highly recommend for someone who's struggling with their self-esteem or their confidence. I would definitely give this a try. Oh my God, this next book. If you are single right now and you are tired of dating and you want to find a healthy, meaningful relationship, this is the book you need. This book is Calling in the One by Catherine Woodward Thomas. 7 weeks to finding the love of your life, or 7 weeks to attract the love of your life. And I know at first glance, it sounds maybe a little bit woo-woo or maybe a little bit too good to be true, but just give it a chance, okay? So this book is meant to help people attract the love that they want in their life by transforming their inner world. It focuses on healing past wounds, changing your limiting beliefs, and also becoming emotionally available for a relationship. This book also talks a little bit about attachment styles, which I have another book that I'm going to talk about a little bit later that also talks about that because it's very interesting. Overall, the core idea of this book is that by becoming the person who is ready for love, you naturally attract the right partner for you. I do have to admit, even though I didn't read this before I met my partner, I actually only discovered this book like maybe 6 months ago, and I read it for my coaching purposes and just wanting to read it. I was so curious, but even through my own personal experience, I just found that to be so true. Like when you become the person who is ready to be in a relationship with the partner that you're desiring, when you look at yourself and have this honest conversation with yourself and kind of challenge your beliefs and challenge your behaviors, that's when you can really become this person and ultimately get into this relationship that you're looking for. And so obviously the book says 7 weeks to attract the love of your life, and that's because there's 49 lessons in the book and they're relatively short. So the idea is that you commit to reading this book for 7 weeks, reading the lesson, doing the little exercise that comes with it. Throughout the book, you not only learn to prepare for this relationship, but you also learn to love yourself. And I almost feel like it's worth it reading it for that reason alone. In a nutshell, this book isn't gonna give you external dating strategies or anything like that. It's really about the self-reflection and the personal growth bit. But honestly, there's already so much out there on dating strategies, and I think what holds 95% of people back from having a relationship is the stuff that's inside. So if you're single and you're watching this, get this book and let me know how it goes. Okay, so this next book is by far the best book I've ever read when it comes to money, but not in the way that you would think. And I'll explain to you why. This is The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. Just incredible. Every single person should read this book. And the reason why I say that is because this book isn't like a step-by-step or technical guide on how to invest your money or how to manage your money. This book is much more about how our emotions and our habits and our past experiences shape our financial decisions and dictate our experience with money. I'm not going to share too many details about the book because I really want you to read it, but I'll share a little bit about why this book was so eye-opening to me. And it's because I, for a long time, had a scarcity mindset when it came to money. Honestly, it kept me stuck in the same place for a really long time until I got so sick of it that I forced myself to change that. This was the book that actually really encouraged me and forced me to take a hard look at my own biases and my own limiting beliefs around money, and really helped me change that and ultimately get me to where I am today, which is a much better, freer, more abundant mindset when it comes to money. So yeah, this is honestly a book that would be great for someone in their 20s who's kind of just learning to understand money and gain financial literacy. But this is also great for someone who is maybe a little bit older and wants to challenge their mindset around money. It's also a really easy read. It kind of reads like a novel. It's not one of those dense finance books. So definitely check this one out. Another book in the finance category that I really enjoyed is Girls That Invest by Simran Kaur. Different from the last book, this book is more of a beginner-friendly guide to investing, like mutual funds, ETFs, stocks, and things like that, and just basically breaks down all of those financial concepts that can be really overwhelming and scary in the beginning. Even though this is a guide and it's a little bit more step-by-step, like practical investing advice, it's still written in a very relatable and easy to understand way. And it also still talks about the emotional side, like fear around money, lack of confidence around money, and also just the mindset shifts that can make all the difference. Outside of that, I just love that this is written by a woman for women. I love the conversation that's happening around women in investing right now and educating women on how to invest and how to build this financial freedom for themselves. I just think it's so important. And if you've watched my videos for a long time, you know that I've always been an advocate for this. I had to include this book because I just think it's a unicorn. If you're watching this and you've been curious about investing or what else you might be able to do with your money, you should definitely read this book. Okay, switching gears here. This next book is called Attached. And this is the book that I was telling you about earlier that's all about attachment styles. This is such an insightful, incredibly helpful book. Definitely the best book that I've read about attachment theory. And if you've never heard of attachment theory, it's a psychological framework about relationships, especially the early childhood bonds between us and our parents or caregivers. It's essentially how we connect with people that we love and how that stems from our childhood experiences. A quick example of this is that if you feel safe and cared for by your parents, you're gonna trust that they're always gonna be there for you, versus if they're there sometimes but not other times, you might start to worry or feel clingy. Essentially, the patterns that are created in our childhood also shape how we act and handle relationships as we grow into adults. So that's kind of what this book is about. It talks about the three main attachment styles: secure, anxious, and avoidant. And the reason why I think this book is so important is because, one, most of us don't know about this and have no idea what type of attachment style we have. And two, this book teaches you about each attachment style, helps you identify with one of the three, maybe even help you identify the partner or partners you've been dating in the past, and ultimately help you recognize the patterns that may be sabotaging your relationships. Outside the actual attachment theory and the science behind it, they actually include a lot of real life stories and realistic scenarios and examples, which I think makes it that much easier to read and also understand. Like, sometimes I read a story in there and I was like, it seems really familiar. I think this book is great for everyone, but I think it's especially great for people who maybe aren't as spiritually inclined. This book is very much science-backed, and it's just a practical guide on how to build more secure, fulfilling relationships. Okay, so this next one, I feel like a lot of you have maybe seen floating around on social media. I feel like this book is everywhere, or has been everywhere for the last couple of years. It's Atomic Habits by James Clear. And as you can probably tell, this book is all about habits, how to break bad ones, build good ones, and how tiny changes can lead to remarkable results. I have to say, I've read a lot of books about habits in the past, and when I first picked this up, I wasn't necessarily expecting anything different. I thought that it was gonna be kind of similar to what I've read in the past, but I'm really glad it proved me wrong, and obviously I'm including it in this video for a reason. This book is the perfect mix of actual practical habits, ideas, things that you can do at home, combined with the deeper reasoning of why it's so important. Early on in the book, he talks about this 4-step habit loop. It's cue, craving, response, and reward. And he kind of uses that throughout the book to explain how habits work and how to build new ones. Throughout the book, he uses that framework and then applies them to very simple, everyday things that we all do. Like he even uses brushing your teeth as an example. I think he does a good job of trying to make this as accessible and as easy as possible. Like even the busiest people could make these small changes. And one of the ways he does that is talking about habit stacking. I think there's like a whole chapter in the book about habit stacking and how to implement that in really practical ways. But the part of the book that really stood out to me, and you guys are probably gonna notice a pattern, is when he talks about the role of identity in habit formation. Again, it's coming back to this idea that in order to make a change in your life, you can't just change your habits, you also have to change your identity, and you have to step into this new person. And I really like that because ultimately it's not just about the habits, it's about becoming the person who naturally does these things and has these habits. If you're interested in seeing how I've been applying this in my own life, I talk about this in my spring reset vlog, so I'll link that in the cards. You can kind of see how I implement that in my morning routine and in my everyday habits, and also in my mindset and identity. Okay, next I have The Power of Now. I'm sure some of you have heard or seen this book. I've read this a couple times. There's like a ton of highlighter in this book. This is one of those books that's more spiritual. It's a spiritual guide to finding peace and fulfillment in the present moment. And this book is really all about the present, and honestly how most of us actually don't live in the present moment ever. It's pretty crazy. Before I get into the gist of this book, I will say it is more spiritual, and I think that if you maybe haven't been exposed to that or just getting into it, this book might be a little bit out there or a little bit challenging to grasp. I would just say that if you're curious and you are able to have an open mind, this book could be really amazing and really special. But I will say that when I first got it, I actually didn't read it because it wasn't the right time for me. And I truly believe that with books, like they just find you at the right time, and I ended up reading it many years later. Like I mentioned, this book is pretty much all about the importance of being present and how we can find our way back to being present. The author basically talks about how most of us are not living in the present at any given time, and most of us are actually living either in the past or worrying about the future. And there's a really important part of this book that says that most of our suffering is actually caused by that, caused by either us being stuck in the past or worrying about the future, rather than experiencing life as it unfolds in front of us. What really stood out to me about this book is how we create so much suffering for ourselves doing these very like normalized everyday things, such as overthinking, resisting change, forcing things to happen, or clinging to things that are trying to leave our life but we are not ready to let go of. And so he talks about this throughout the book and explains how we add a lot of unnecessary stress to our lives, and ultimately explains how mindfulness can actually calm that down and bring us into a state where we can actually be present and enjoy the present moment. I'm not going to give too much away, but this is one of those books that really makes you look at life differently. And I think if you let it, you can change your life in a very powerful way. Okay, the last book that I'm gonna talk about in this video is actually a book that I just finished a couple days ago. And this is one of those like weird universe timing things, because I was actually supposed to film this video before all of my travels and my tour of the Midwest, essentially, that I took last week for work. But now I'm so glad that I pushed filming, because I actually added this book last minute and switched out the other one that I had. This is another one that I listened to as an audiobook, but I will be buying the actual copy because I think it's nice to have both. And I obviously want it for my library. So this book is called Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. It's written by Joe Dispenza, and there's a reason I saved this one for last. And if you're still here, kudos to you, because this is the book that is actually going to change your life. If you're familiar with any of Joe Dispenza's work, you'll know that it's a lot of quantum physics, neuroscience, but also very meditation heavy. And so he has these meditations that he offers that people can buy. I've never really personally done them. He has these like week-long workshops and things like that, but he also just has books where he talks about how to quantum leap, how to shift your identity, how to manifest, things like that. And so this book is all about that, but more so on the identity component, which I've kind of mentioned throughout this video, which is also why I saved this one for the last, because this one is particularly interesting, but also logical at the same time. So Joe basically talks about how our thoughts and emotions create our reality, but he also talks about how we can rewire our brain to let go of old habits and break free from our limiting beliefs, essentially. What I like about this book, and the reason why I think a lot of you will benefit from it too, is because so much of it is neuroscience and quantum physics. And although there are meditational components to the book, a lot of it is science-backed, which I think is what people are missing sometimes around the conversation of manifestation and changing your reality and whatnot. It feels very woo-woo, and it doesn't feel like something we can touch. And I think in this book they explain it from a very scientific perspective, which I think for a lot of people makes it more real. So the main idea of this book is understanding how we can shift into this new version of ourselves, and also how we stop ourselves from doing that through our thoughts and our beliefs and the way we look at ourselves and the world around us. That's it for this video. I've gone ahead and linked all the books in the description box down below so you guys can check those out. I would love to hear if you're interested in reading any one of these books, or maybe if you've read them already, definitely let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. I would love to hear from you guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one. Mwah!